Back to the Northeast, the state of Vermont, the Reparative Probation Program, and David Peebles is here along with John Perry.
Thank you. I'm Dave Peebles, and with me is John Perry. I'm going to try and give you a quick look at what the evolution of the Vermont Reparative Probation Program has been, and then John will illustrate that with some examples of recent behaviors that we've experienced. Echoing the previous presenter, there's never been a time in this country, I think, where the criminal justice system has been subject to more demand and less satisfaction. In Vermont, we've wrestled with that in, I think, a quite unusual way. What we did is we did market research, professional market research, to ask the question, how can we, in fact, do a better job? And we learned out of that some very startling things. Principally, we learned that perhaps it shouldn't be our job completely. What we learned is that people wanted the victim and the community to be the center of a justice process. What they wanted from offenders was accountability, an apology, repair for the damage done, okay, and a clear understanding of what the impact of that crime was. Out of that experience, we created the Vermont Reparative Probation Program, which in effect is a sentence of an offender to a community board composed of victims, neighbors, and other significant others who have not only the capacity, and this is very significant, this is a major program shift, but they have the authority to craft a successful amend. As that's occurred, in contrast to traditional street supervision practices, we have engendered a tremendous demand, okay, for new services, if you will. I mean, what we have here is the beginning, I think, of a promise of how we can probably change some of the very traditional ways that we've done justice by coming to a face-to-face neighborhood justice. Specifically, I mean, how does it work? In this recent experience, we have an 83% successful completion rate. We've had an empowered community that has taken us by the hand and not felt like it was our problem, but we felt that it was a joint problem. And we've been able to do this at somewhere around 3/4 of the cost of our previous street supervision practices. John, if you'd like to talk about some anecdotes, I think in the stories it's really the truth.
I know you folks want numbers, but and I'll give you some. First one is 105. This kid drove 105 miles an hour through a small village of Proctor, just outside of Rutland. He wasn't quite over the limit, alcohol, just under 0.08. So he got charged with careless and negligent driving. He came to the board, the court sentenced him to the board. The board chair happened to live on that road and told him in no uncertain terms how he felt about having a 7-year-old daughter that just might have been riding her bicycle when he went by. Well, the kid denied that he had an alcohol problem. So the board decided to send him to the Lenny Burke Farm to do his community service. Now, Lenny Burke Farm is a nursing care facility for severe brain trauma patients, basically people in comas. And his community service was essentially to tend a human vegetable for 3 weekends. When he came back, after about halfway through his 90-day program, his wife came with him, and she said to the board, "What did you do to him? He hasn't had a drink since he came back from that first weekend, and he signed himself up from AA. And he hasn't hit me." 32, that's the next number. Woman wrote 32 bad checks. Tried to take care of her kids. It got reduced to 2 counts of uttering a false token. The board heard her, looked at the affidavit, and said, you wrote 32 bad checks. You need to write 32 letters of apology, and we'd like you to hand deliver them. And finally, my last story, the number is 1. It's Ben and Jerry's story. The kid failed to stop for a herd of cows crossing the road and hit one of them. Didn't kill it. The farmer was right there. So he got convicted of careless and negligent driving. Sent to the board, and this was in Barrie. And the board met 8 o'clock in the morning, and Looked around, farmer wasn't there. Where's the farmer? Well, he's milking. So the board said, well, let's go to the barn. So they got up and took the offender and went to the barn and held the hearing in the presence of the injured cow. That's community justice.
Question? Dick Hatcher.
As I understand it, the innovation is that you get people thinking in a different way about punishment with respect to the violations. And it does seem to me that it's a good program because it involves people. What is the feeling about replicating a program like this in a heavily urbanized area, and particularly the factor of intimidation?
If I can take a stab at that.
Could you come up to the microphone, please?
I think that the success rate for replication in a heavily urbanized area would be excellent. The most significant study that I've seen recently is the one that's been done over the last decade in Chicago that looked at, they broke Chicago into like 383 neighborhoods of about 8,000 people each, and they looked at distinguishing characteristics about why are some neighborhoods safe, okay, and why are some not. And they found several variables, one of which was basic human interaction and people's concern about quality of life. Intimidation, as you begin to look at neighborhood community justice, is something that people will have to seize, the desire to have a better quality of life. As you deal with neighbors and break down the strangers rule, which is one of the things in an urban area that really controls a lot of interactions, there will be, I believe, a groundswell of people who will feel empowered and feel that these tools, which are very simple, face-to-face justice tools, can serve their ends. I feel strongly that this is a highly replicable program, not just in nice states with white steeples.
Can I ask you, where I grew up in the South, we once had a system called community justice. And it had one system of justice for blacks and another for whites. How does one ensure equality before the law for this kind of system?
Want to take a shot?
Sure. The key here is that this is not a system of punishment. And punishment needs to be meted out with equality. But restoration of victims and communities and repair of the damage and making amends by serving the community can be individualized. The justice can be fit to the crime, the offender, the victim, the circumstances, and the community. And we don't need to worry as much about unequal meting out of punishment. Citizens do this. People who live next to you, people who know you do this. And I think that mitigates, at least, against inequality.
Ed Doran?
If I could add just one thing to that quickly, sir. I think the other thing that's a key component is government, if you will, the judicial system's responsibility to do quality assurance and training within this process to make sure that things don't drift from the mark.
Help me understand again, which kinds of offenses are treated this way as opposed to treated in the more traditional way? It is not merely the type of offense that determines the treatment.
Two factors go in, the type of offense being non-violent first, and low-risk offenders who have not had serious chronic records, although we've had some violations of those outlines. I've lost it.
So these are all first offenders.
They're not first offenders. They may be repeat and multiple offenders, but they are non-violent offenders. The courts choose which ones get this sentence, and then the community board gets to choose whether or not they want to accept that case.
But the wonderful thing is the promise that all at this point, because this is a relatively new program, that the courts are focusing on nonviolent offenders that have relatively low risk profiles, that we believe that the restorative promise, okay, can unfold with violent offenders who are incarcerated, What we need to do is have people find ways to become reincorporated into communities through good works, if you will, as corny as that might sound, and through relationships where they were able to repair the damage done. We all know that there are a lot of damages that can never be repaired. But what's currently occurring, okay, in this country, we have almost 2 million people incarcerated, okay, well, not only fiscally, but it'll socially bankrupt us because punishment does not work at that level.
I'm afraid our time has run out. Is anybody, did you have a very pressing, Bill Klinger and Dick Hatcher both were anxious here. We feel,
Very quickly, do you have numbers in terms of the reduction, the number of the people who go into penal institutions in the state?
Two sets of numbers. In 1994, 30% of the low-risk, low-severity population got a jail sentence. This is people who hadn't done serious crimes and who hadn't had a prior serious record. Sentencing was essentially random. In 1997, 2% of that segment got a jail sentence. What that's allowed us to do is to focus our prison resources on the people for whom prison is effective, i.e. violent predators. And the same dates, 1994 to 1997, the releasees, the violent felons who were released from prison, had served on average 75% of their minimum term. Last year, they served 125% of their minimum term on average. So what we've done is restructure the resources, focusing prison on the predators and the community on repairing the damage.
It's managed care for correctional services.
gentlemen, David Peebles and John Perry, thank you.